they're missing a lot of the large muscle group structure. They become so specialized that they don't have the large muscle groups necessary to support what they're trying to do.
Right.
So, for example, somebody like clarinetist is so specialized in the forearms, in the arm structure, in the embouchure, that you end up with things like arm injuries, jaw injuries. Usually those eventually manifest into low back pain, and the issue may not even be in the hands or the arms or the jaw.
Right.
It's probably somewhere else in addition to those issues.
Right. And that's kind of to bring this around to something that I do, which is work with elite athletes in different sports, mostly weightlifting, but they're a lot of the time in the same area. They will have, like wrist injuries or elbow issues, and a lot of that can not stem from the wrist or the elbow, but from the abs, for example. So, I know that that's something that a lot of performing artists struggle with is low back pain.
Yeah, okay. That's a big one. Because, really, when you're looking at it, we're micro athletes, so we're just very specialized athletes working with smaller muscle groups. The low back is super common across the board.
Right.
Definitely for instrumentalists, definitely for vocalists. I think a lot of times for theater folks, although I think they sometimes have a harder time noticing it, and definitely for dancers too. The low back is a big one. So if you're, for example, having low back pain, you're not sure what's causing it, one of the big things that I see pretty commonly is just a complete lack of core structure. And there's a lot of kind of misconception about what the core is and what core structure is, I think. I know when I was starting out, I had this concept of the core being like, oh, well, how do you build a strong core? Well, you contract it and you do crunches and you do sit-ups and everything that's just compacting.
Very rarely the case.
Right. Yeah. Usually what we're actually wanting to do with like the low abs and obliques especially, those are, high abs here, low abs there. I'm sure you can't see that from the camera, but they're usually very weak when you talk about pressing out.
Right.
And
which is a big thing that musicians will need to have, especially.
It's a big thing. Especially seated musicians who have to support weight, which is almost all of us. But it's a big thing for vocalists too. You see a lot of vocalists who are really hyperextended in the back, and I think it's because they typically don't have the stabilizers in the core in terms of pressing out. So if you combine that with something like a deep muscle like the psoas, which is usually very short and it's from sitting a lot. Sitting is, I think, one of the worst things we can do as people.
Oh, I think most physical therapists there can agree with that.
Right. And so as that gets shorter, we get more.
As we're sitting.
As we're sitting, of course, because what else are we going to do?
Yeah, well, and I've seen that change with you as a musician, in that we have spent a lot of time on building strength and mobility in the low abs and obliques, and that has carried over to your performance.
For sure.
Yeah.
For a long time, and y'all should see this if you check out my bio under the health tab on my website, or I have posts on Instagram and Facebook. I was hurt for a long time, and really badly. Wasn't able to touch the clarinet at all for 3 months. It was additional 3 months of pretty intensive rehab. It was bad. So really, from the point where I finished the physical therapy, I really was never able to get the bell of the clarinet up off of my knees. And most clarinetists know that's a pretty big one for us, is we tend to want to rest the bell in our knees, in between our knees, bring our knees together. And that requires leaning forward for most of us. Just because it gets heavy after a while. We're sitting for 2.5 hour rehearsals, back-to-back lessons. It's a thing.
I mean, if that's specialization, if I've ever heard of it. Like that's, most people shouldn't be able to do that. And so to place that expectation on people and then not provide some sort of training and a structure and a learning how to use your body to perform better for musicians and performing artists, that's a big deal.
Well, a lot of the problem is that what we do looks so harmless compared to something like strongman, weightlifting, football. It looks so harmless. Oh, you're just holding up a little clarinet. Oh, you're just holding up a little flute.
But it's the same level of pain.
It is.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, so for me, once we started working on that structure, I found I was taking gigs, and all of a sudden I was naturally coming up out of my knees, and it wasn't strained to do it. It just felt good.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about between when I experienced that from building the core and the time when I ended my physical therapy.
Right.
That was, I want to say, 2009, 2010. So we're talking almost 10 years of not being able to get the bell out of my knees.
Right.
And
then
this is what makes the difference.
Yeah, and that's been a pretty short time frame as far as
Very short time.
things like that. It's what,
very short
6
time
months, 8 months ish.
I think it's a little longer, but not much.
Okay.
Not much.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings up an interesting idea of what Tuned and Toned does, is clarifying that it's not a rehab program.
No, absolutely.
It's about getting past the what did you call it?
I call it not broken.
Right.
Not broken is the point when I left physical therapy. It was, I have nothing but the utmost respect for my physical therapist because I couldn't touch the instrument. I couldn't hold my arm at a 90-degree angle without shaking. And then I could.
Right. Well,
so that's
the goal of physical therapy, is to get you to do that.
But along with most traditional therapies, the goal is not broken. And bridging that gap between not broken and really elite performance level, that's really hard. It's extremely hard.
Well, it's often not addressed enough either.
No. There's been a lot of work towards that end in the past, I want to say, about 30 years or so. Mid to late 70s is where I started seeing a lot of the published research on specifically musicians, because dancers are a little more open to it. Not 100%, not as much as I think most people would think, but musicians were very covert about our injuries. And so it wasn't until the mid to late 70s that you started seeing studies published on the statistics. And even then, it was only people who were willing to admit it if you didn't ask for their names.
Right. That's when you told me that blew my mind. I had no idea that musicians had massive levels, statistically 100. You said 100% of. So
depending on the study, and I have these posted on my profiles too. It's the Janet Horvath Playing Less Injured study. The studies she lists in her books. Between the mid 1980s and the maybe 2010, 2011, somewhere in there, I have to check the exact dates, you would see statistics, depending on the exact study, of somewhere between 85% of musicians were admitting to injury to, for one specific study, it literally was 100% of entering music performance majors were having something with some problem they were relating to performance or performing difficulty, I think is how they phrased it. It was a very strange way to phrase it. So it's not necessarily 100% of us, but it's a huge percent.
Yeah.
And really those 30 or 40 years since, like I said, the 70s, that was a huge foundational layer of work that needed to be done. Because we just weren't talking about it before then, and it was a huge issue to even think about talking it. So we've had a couple of generations that really laid a foundation for us to actually do better at this point.
Right.
So now we're finally starting to see things like, I know there's a program up in Boston, I can't remember her name, she does yoga for musicians, just yoga for musicians, specialized.
Right.
We have Alexander teachers and Feldenkrais teachers and body mapping people who are just for musicians.
Right.
And that's huge. And this is, I think, something that you do see some personal trainers who are trying to cater towards musicians. I haven't seen anybody applying the exact principles that we are, but we are starting to see specialized programs for performing artists in general. And again, one of the things I really like about these methodologies that I've studied is that you don't just see musicians, you see musicians collaborating with theater kids and dancers.
And that's kind of how you know that something works, really,
exactly.
and that it's needed.
If it crosses modalities.
And even crazier than that is that this is a growing field in athletic training too.
Yes.
Physical fitness, and that there is a there is a wide field of physical therapy and, you know, getting people from injured to not injured.
Yes.
Or would you call it not broken?
Yeah.
And then there's also a wide field of trainers that are focused on getting athletes to elite level performance.
Yes.
But there is this hole in the middle of getting people who were broken, who are not broken anymore, but need to get back up to that level of elite athletic performance. And that's
Yes.
essentially, we're talking about
Yes.
the same thing,
Right.
but just applied with two different fields of people.
Exactly.
And that oftentimes the principles that are going to get athletes from not broken to elite, and musicians and performing artists from not broken to elite
Yeah.
are the same thing.
Yeah.
Really.
Yep.
So
For sure.
a little bit, we've got some services that you offer.
Yes. Yeah.
And we've talked a little bit about who they're meant for, which
Right.
is musicians, dancers, theater, all of that, anything that you would consider a performing artist. What are those sessions, though, that you do?
So we really got, for right now, we've really got three major services. Hopefully we'll expand into that later. We'll talk about that towards the end. So we've got really the three main services. The first one is going to be private training sessions. Those are for people who want to come in, do about an hour's worth of work, get very individualized attention. At the end of it, I'm going to give you a personalized plan to go home with. Can meet in a week, can meet in 2 weeks. It's very individualized. Somebody who is more injured versus somebody who is more just wants to be preventative. That's going to be two very different timelines for meeting.
But the benefit of that is that just a performing artist can't just sign up for any gym and get what they actually need to get better at their performing art.
Right.
They're coming to you because this is what you specialize in, and you know exactly what they need to work on.
Right.
Right.
I know their seasons. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that stuff that's unique to.
Well, that's bring that up a little bit. Like, what are some of the unique things that they are going to need?
I think the season is a big thing for us too. Just like athletes, we have our performing seasons. We have our off seasons. Summer is a big one for us for taking some time training. We do still have some competitions going on. That's going to be just peppered throughout the year. Something like if we're meeting in December, most of us are playing a lot. We're all performing a lot, and that's across the board, all of us.
And so kind of in that time, you're mostly working on maintenance,
prevention, what's stiff today, what's hurting today. Great, let's make sure that we alleviate some of that and avoid anything that is high risk for you.
And then in the off season? In
the off season, let's talk about the things that are high risk for you. Never to the point of risking injury, but just to the point of, okay, well, so my injury's in my arms. I'm not in the on season, I'm not going to be doing anything that's like heavy arm workout. But off season, I want to focus there.
You're gonna need to build that up.
I want to build that up. I want to get it better. Outside of that, I think there are a lot of, certainly not across the board, but there are a lot of performing artists who are just afraid to work out. They're afraid to touch a weight. And it's something that I was in that boat too. A lot of the traditional, what you're told when you're hurt is, okay, we'll just rest and don't pick up anything heavy and ice it and soak it and that's it.
Yeah, and that fear is not unwarranted. It's just just a little bit uneducated.
It is, but I think it's kind of compounded by what you typically see out of, experientially, PE coaches, personal trainers in a standard gym. It kind of instills that, I'm going to go in and they're going to expect me to throw around a bunch of weight just so that I can get all the reps in. That's not what this is. This is about what do you need, and let's talk about that.
It's not about weight or rep goals, but you just creating healthy movement patterns, really. Good. Okay, so you've got private sessions, semi-private?
The private ones are really for people who want the individualized attention. The semi-private, really there's two groups of people that's going to really benefit. One is if you and a buddy have very similar goals, it's really
work well together.
If you have that kind of relationship, you have the same kind of concerns. It's more fun in a lot of ways. It's a lot more fun to work out. You're going to push yourself a little bit harder to do a little bit better, and I want to emphasize better, not more. More is not better, better is better. And the other benefit to that semi-private session, it's better for people who have the financial restrictions, which I know I had for a long time. I can't tell you how much money I sank into trying to fix my issues.
Right.
That after a certain point, you just go, well, I'm not throwing any more money at this. I'm going to deal with it myself.
Right.
So if you have those financial restrictions, this is a lot more viable, and across the board, there's a lot of options, I think, for most people for a good buddy to work with.
Right.
You're still going to get a plan. It'll be for the group, but it will still be a plan that's pretty personalized to that team. It's 2 to 4 people going on, and like, again, same with the individualized. Are you going to come back in a week? Are you going to come back in 3 weeks? It depends. So that's a really good option for that.
And then this next one, the assessment, the movement assessment, that's something that I do as well.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your movement assessment?
Basically what it is, it's going to be a much deeper dive into determining where your biggest and most inhibitive weaknesses and dysfunctions are.
Right.
In the large muscle groups. We're going to find what the biggest sticking point is. So this is really for people who need a much more in-depth analysis. And there are plenty of people who I think would really benefit from that.
I mean, my assessment is almost exactly the same. Is that we spent some time trying to figure out what is the root cause of the issue that's holding back your performance, and then fixing that. The key log principle of removing the actual problem, not just the symptoms.
Yes. Right? Yes. Yeah, and that's really what all of these are designed to do. That assessment is really an in-depth dive, and they kind of suck when you're going through them, but they're so good when you're done.
And it's I think it's something that everybody should go through at some point. But it is it's not for the faint of heart. No, for sure.
I certainly haven't met anybody that I've looked at that I've thought you wouldn't benefit from an assessment. Whether or not they're ready for it, it's a different story. So that's really the assessments.
Right.
And the good part about any of these is there's no prerequisite for any of them. You don't have to have an assessment before you can go in and do any of the sessions. You don't have to do only semi-privates or privates before semi-privates. It doesn't matter. Any order is fine.
And now something to take note of here is that it doesn't have to be somebody who is coming back from injury as a performing artist. This could be somebody that is already a performing artist. Maybe they're in a high school or graduating and are looking to get started to continue to optimize their performance.
Yes.
Prehab, really.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Cool. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So you've got an educator's workshop coming up. We had planned for the 1st, but some teacher schedules. Yeah. That's a big thing.
Yeah, we had a little conversation with a couple teachers, and I'll post this on all the sites tomorrow for sure. But we're going to move the educator's workshop from June 1st to June 22nd. I looked at the schedule. I didn't quite put a couple things together, and so June 1st is just not viable for a lot of people.
So what can people expect from the educator's workshop?
Really, the general overview of it is going to be, we're going to talk a lot about how to identify things that are major and very common risk factors.
Warning signs.
Big warning signs. There's, I've talked about this with several people, but there's been this trend as we see the studies going forward. I'm seeing personally the age of the students showing risk factors and risk signs. The age of the students is getting lower. So it used to be
another common factor between musicians and elite athletes.
Right.
It's the same thing.
It used to be that it was like maybe senior in high school, college, undergrad, that's where you'd start to see the injuries crop up. And then as I got past my master's into my doctorate, I was seeing early high school freshmen, sophomores with injury and warning signs, and now I'm seeing middle schoolers who have extremely high risk factors. And there's only so much you can do in a private lesson setting, in a band setting, in an orchestra setting. There's only so much you can do. Which is part of why I think something like this is so necessary, because you need a dedicated time to it. It needs to be like your daily practice. So we're going to talk about what are the common risk factors, what are the common signs of it. and symptoms. And if we get to that point where they're coming to you with pain and you don't know what to say,
right,
we're going to help you with that too.
Right.
That's the big grand overview.
right. Because we're not expecting band directors to be able
Right.
to fix
Right.
pain issues,
That's
but
not realistic.
knowing how to recognize the signs and then
Yes.
when to refer them to somebody and who to refer them to. Really.
And more than just, you know, you hear a lot of people say, well, I just tell them to ice and rest. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, because what are you going to say? You have to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to try to help them as best you can, but you're not really comfortable or qualified. Like,
Right.
what are you going to do?
Right.
But a lot of people don't even know, you know, when is it good to ice and when is it bad to ice? Because there's a time it's bad to ice.
Right.
And I see a lot of people using ice at the wrong time. Same thing with braces and support structures. Those are becoming absolutely rampant at absolutely the worst possible time.
Yep.
And it can be difficult if you're watching somebody and you see that they're getting worse and you don't know why or what to say about it.
Well, and that's something that, you know, always really pushed me to dive into this years ago. Was it's really tough to be coaching somebody and know that they have issues and not know what to do and how to fix it or who to send them to.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're aiming to correct. So we can expect some demonstrations of injury-related positions.
Yes. Yeah.
What else?
Just common places we store tension, which are usually also related to common places of weakness that we address here all the time.
Right.
There's a couple very, very, very common words and phrases that trigger. I'm sorry, we have Ryan May, in case you guys didn't know, working the cameras for us. He's making faces at us back there. So if you're tuning in, say hi to him. But there are a lot of words and phrases that we see in the pedagogy. And we talk about similar things in musical pedagogy all the time. We talk about, well, we teach this technique using these words, even though it's not 100% accurate because it gets this result. Well, we have the same thing with, you're trying to get a specific result and you're saying something to the student.
The amount of connections between this and athletes is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Just absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
I never, 3 years ago, I never would have thought that this is the case. It boggles my mind a little bit.
Yep.
So demonstrations, injury-related positions, words and phrases that are going to trigger some tension. And then locations of where tension is stored and where weaknesses is.
Yes.
Some imbalance stuff as well.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. And then we're going to finish with some actual exercise.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The end will be an abbreviated workout like we would do here. It will be optional in case you don't want to do it. You can still come.
Right.
But it just seems silly to have people come all this way and not get a sample
of what
it is
you
we
actually
do.
Yeah. And to bring up something else is if you have never felt that type of training, how are you supposed to teach it?
Right.
Teach and recognize and know what other people are going through. So.
Right. And I know as a teacher, I wouldn't feel comfortable referring my students to something that I didn't experience.
Same thing with me. If I had never done a snatch, I would not feel confident about teaching somebody how to do that.
For those of you who don't know, what is a snatch?
Oh, that is when you pick up a bar and it goes overhead in one fluid movement.
Yeah.
So, sorry. So no, I'm not gonna demo. Finishing with a workout. Now, some stuff that we're gonna do in the future. What do you have planned?
It's a number of things. For the YouTube channel, which hopefully we're streaming to at this point, I think we are. We're gonna have a couple things coming up with that. It's gonna be a series of instructional videos for a lot of the just foundational exercises that we do here.
Yep.
We're going to break that down with not just how to do them in the description of the muscles that are being used, but to the best of my ability, how they feel and what you should be feeling.
Right.
How to do it with a partner if we can, depending on what it is.
Which is also a useful thing that when you get the movement assessment or the training programs and a plan moving forward, they can refer back to this.
Yes.
Which is really useful.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, we're going to include too anything that is a scaled back version.
Right.
So if you can't do the movement for whatever reason, we're going to have ways for you to modify it so that you can at least get activation in there.
Right.
And it's all going to be stuff that can be done at home.
Yep.
Ideally, we're also going to have a series of conversation streams like this with other experts. I don't know if they'll be live or pre-recorded, but hopefully we can get that done.
Got a couple of those lined up.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. We're looking with other people who are in related fields, more ways to optimize it and just different specialties.
Yep.
Eventually, I'm hoping to have, not hoping to have, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. We're going to have some remote programming that you can purchase online if you're not local, so that you can still have some access to things at home. It's probably realistically not going to be ready until the fall, just because I want to test it and make sure. Because it's never going to be the same as working one-on-one.
Right.
You're never going to have that expert to double check you or to give you those little extra cues. I can do my best through videos, but so as soon as that is up and functional, probably this fall, that will be available. And potentially, if we get enough people who are interested and want to do it, we might end up hosting locally a group class for performing artists, where we do just a little workout together, which is always fun. Group workouts, if you haven't done, are super fun. And just keep it something that is beneficial across the board for whoever's in the class.
So if that's something that you guys are interested in,
let us know.
Yeah. Otherwise, how would we know?
Right. Do we have any questions come in?
No questions.
No questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Anybody have any questions?
No. Something I think would be interesting to throw out there that y'all haven't quite discussed, that kind of makes both of you unique, along with obviously another group that we train under the philosophy of, is the training with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. Not to really go in depth, but maybe you could give a little teaser to kind of...
That's a whole video in
I
and of
know.
itself. That we will get to that, I'm pretty sure, at some point. I'm not even sure I can break that down in short format. Do you want to try?
Let's see. Essentially, people need to do physical things with their bodies more often. That is going to put them into that sympathetic. You can Google that. I'm not going to try and explain it. More often.
Yeah.
And that in turn will help with your parasympathetic activities, and in short, balancing out your entire body.
And by parasympathetic, we mean things like flow, like where you perform from. We get really lopsided with that. And this is part of why I think a lot of creative people, artistic people, performing artists, and athletes, to be quite honest, although I think athletes are a little bit better off on this field, performing artists suffer a little bit more from this, we've got a very high rate of depression. And it's partly because we are so overbalanced that when we do get stressed, we're not physically doing anything with it.
Right.
And that's, I think, about the best Reader's Digest version I can do with that.
I agree.
Sorry to throw you on the spot, just a very unique element.
And that brings up a great talking point about something that we will for sure bring up in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, cool.
Sure.
Social media handles?
Yeah, let's do some plugs. So you can find me online. My website is tunedandtoneperformance.com. The Facebook is @tunedandtoneperformance, Instagram @tunedandtoneperformance. My YouTube, for some reason, is not coming up yet when you search on YouTube, but if you search me on Google, I think it's the 3rd or 4th result, so it's right up there.
If you forget any of that, jenkabbas.com.
I'm not sure that website is even forwarded anymore.
It will be, if not.
It's supposed to be. tunedandtonedperformance.com. .com.
And then my name is Brian Chambers. You can find me on Instagram @Coach B Chambers, and then my gym, which we're in right now, Big Bend Strength and Conditioning. That is on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook @Big Bend strength and conditioning. And then you can find us on the website at www.bigbendsc.com.
And feel free to stop by in person too and just have a chat.
Yeah.
Brian's here all the time.
All the time.
All right. Thanks for checking in, guys.
Thanks, guys.